Previously on the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! The latter half of 2010 Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a good time. The meta was relatively healthy with an injection of new staples like Solemn Warning and Pot of Duality. Top decks from that time would include X-Saber, Synchro Plant, Gravekeeper, and 6 Samurai. But this was a heavily seasoned season with no lack of experimentation. The 5D's era has been one that has bounced around between degenerate and thriving formats, which makes this ultimate video interesting. Yes, this will be the final entry in the 5D saga. Whoa. Today we'll be looking at the spring of 2011 Nationals season in both the named Trishula and Librarian formats, as well as the end of the Synchro era right before the dawn of a new summoning mechanic, and thus a new series. Can't believe we made it this far. It's about time Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds got past the finish line. Once again, a Yu-Gi-Oh! History video kicks off with a new list. This time, it's the March 2011 list that didn't pull any punches. Let's go backwards. Compared to the usual, the unlimited spots are mostly reserved for cards once big in the GX era. Otherwise, I suppose Duloran didn't do as much as Konami thought it would. Semi-limited would hit Fairies, Synchro, Gravekeeper, and Blackwing primarily. Solemn Warning would get checked as the most generic new staple over Pot of Duality. The semi-limited thought process would continue on the limited list as well, with the same decks sans Gravekeepers getting cards hit, just now with 6 Samurai getting list representation. Another notable card on here was Book of Moon for having the same general reasoning as Solemn Warning. Forbidden would only include 3 cards, yet they were notable cards that were degenerate for the game. This made Yugioh Guardian the second banned Synchro monster alongside Dark Strike Fighter, which is a surprise to me that Colossal Fighter or Armory Arm weren't checked at all, for the Colossal Arms loop was still a problematic threat. The March 2011 list wouldn't be the sole defining factor for the format. There would be a number of releases, the first of which would be the Dragunity Legion structure deck on March 9th that included common reprints of Dragunity Dux and Legionnaire, and the brand new Dragon Ravine. This field spell allowed you to discard a card to either add a low-level Dragunity monster from deck to hand, or send a dragon from deck to grave. This is notable because, for the most part, field spells followed the original philosophy, save for 1 or 2 cards pushing the envelope. Ravine is essentially a continuous spell in field spell form entirely, which resembles how field spells prominently act today. And remember, during this master rule, only 1 field spell could exist on the field at a time, meaning should you run this deck, then you may run into field spell shenanigans against Gravekeepers. Unfortunately for this new deck, it would not make a strong, widespread presence at the first postless event at YCS Charlotte. Dragunity as a deck was consistent in regards to big synchros and traps. It's one of those cases of an explosive and controlling deck in early format that would fall off rather quickly due to the nature of an evolving environment. Dragunity would top along with other decks as well, Flamville, Empty Jar, and 6 Samurai. However, the first place deck would go to a new strategy, Fish OTK. This was the place to showcase new decks of the meta, and it did not disappoint. This deck revolved around Super Ancient Deep Sea King Colacanth. You needed this card to do anything in the deck, for it could summon a plethora of low-level fish monsters from deck. One in particular is Fishborg Blaster, which could get you into Synchro monsters. Another one is Oystermeister, which, when removed from the field, would get you more tokens to Synchro summon with. And then the Frog Engine would continue this line of thinking as well. So you end up with tons of monsters and tuners to get access to powerful Synchros, Black Rose, Scrap, Shooting Star, etc. It's not Frog FTK, as that was a 1-card combo, and Effect Veiler and Warning now existed, but its strength was similar in that its playstyle was meant to trip up your opponent and force them into a misplay and win with a variety of OTK options. Colossal Arms loop, buffed up synchros like Red Nova Dragon, Glyceldon, and Brionac to clean up fields with your heavy hand. It's not the most consistent OTK considering it does have its choke points, but it's consistent enough to be meta viable, as it clearly showcases in Charlotte. Despite the deck being an OTK, it did not follow through at the next event at YCS Anaheim in early April, as top 3 would include 3rd place X-Saber and Chaos Control, 2nd place Gravekeeper, and 1st place Hero Beat piloted by Angel Flores. What worked before still works now, I suppose. Not too much longer was the Hidden Arsenal 4 Trishula's Triumph set that included some big cards. Naturia Exterio, the fabled Sir Beryl, Gen X Ally Birdman, and Trishula Dragon of the Ice Barrier. That last card is a level 9 synchro that, while requiring 3 monsters, can remove up to 3 cards from your opponent's hand, field, non-targeting, and graveyard, with the card at hand being a random choice. A powerful new monster if there ever were one. The only major event post HA4, but before anything else notable, was YCS Paris, with X-Saber taking first. Another showcase that the decks of formats past still hold weight. Moving into May would be the WCQ National Championship prize cards, which would translate to TG Hyper Librarian, a level 5 synchro that could let you draw a card each time a monster is synchro summoned. This is a great addition to the synchro deck. It would become widely available in the June-July 2011 Shonen Jump sub-bonus. May 10th would mark the final core set of the 5D's era, Extreme Victory! This set introduces the TG and Mech Lord archetypes. TG, short for Tech Genus, would be the notable of the two moving forward thanks to cards like TG Warwolf, TG Rush Rhino, and TG1 EM1. Otherwise, big cards would include the Chase card, Tour Guide from the Underworld, Reborn Tengu, Xien's Dojo, and W Nebula Meteorite. Tour Guide would be a release that would greatly benefit in the next era, and Tengu can replace itself if it leaves the field in any way, which made it great in synchro decks, the final generic power card in the 5D's era. All in all, Extreme Victory was a solid final core set in the 5D's era, even if it didn't shake the meta to its core. Moving from that would be YCS Orlando, where duelists would still try tried and true strategies like Glad, Blackwing, and even Scrap still trying to climb up the ranks. Yet top 2 decks would go to Tengu Synchro, which adopted Reborn Tengu and Gen X Ally Birdman as a powerful wind engine to the Synchro deck. Birdman could return Tengu, which would get you 2 monsters on field, and since Tengu is a wind monster, Birdman gets an attack boost too. First place would ultimately go to Zombie Plant by Travis Massengale, which made sense given all the graveyard recursion zombies and plants gave. On the 17th would be Duelist Pack Crow, which would include Blackwing, Zephyros Elite, a card that would increase in power. And the final release we're covering is the Lost Sanctuary structure deck on June 14th that included powerful fairy cards like Master Hyperion, Agent of Miracles Jupiter, Agent of Mystery Earth, and cards from the sky. The boss monster, Hyperion, can be special summoned by banishing an agent monster from hand, field, or grave, and you can banish a light fairy from grave to destroy a card on the field. And if Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, then you can use its destruction effect twice per turn. Wow. Watch out for agents moving forward. Post Lost Sanctuary would start 4 days later with YCS Providence. By this point, the meta has settled, and Synchro Plant was the way to go, with Tyree Tinsley taking first. Other decks from this event would include Macro Stun, Herald Agent, Bayou Turbo, Fabled, Frog Synchro, Six Samurai, and Infernity taking second. Almost a month later would be the European Championship, where once again Synchro Plant would take first by Michael Gruner, with Gravekeeper getting second. Aside from a 3rd place X-Saber deck, we would see a surprising 3rd place Worm deck. Worms were slowly forming from hidden Arsenal sets. W Nebula Meteorite is what pushed that archetype to competitiveness. This usually ended in card advantage, reuse of flip effects, and Worm King on field, which would add more value. The deck has a high ceiling compared to other meta decks, however it needs to use its trap card uninterrupted. This made it a more of a defensive grind deck. And then we enter the North American WCQ in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on July 16th, the last call for 5D's Duelists. A neat deck that got 7th was Gear Valley Stun that was all about big beaters, field spells, and skill drain. 3rd place would go to Agent, which showed that even if it's the end of the format, new decks can still surprise. It had great starters in Venus and Earth, plus it had great hand traps like in Honest and Orange Light to allow you to start the game strong. Backed up by strong boss monsters like Arcelor Christia and Master Hyperion, you had great extending capabilities. Its flexibility made it more popular than the previous Herald deck. Second would go to Synchro Plant, which its top spot surprised no one. Perhaps more surprisingly was the first place deck by Hansel Aguero, TG Stun. TG's as a deck was designed to be a synchro spam deck, yet what happened was that duelists would use the TG engine in a stun deck instead. So it followed the anti-meta stun strategy now with a monster engine to help combat the popular synchro plant decks. The monsters would search another upon destruction. Most of them work with Horn of the Phantom Beast, which helps you run over monsters and draw cards. Even TG1 EM1 was a unique trap akin to Creature Swap that was hard to play around, so the deck could control and be aggressive too. After all, it could still access the extra deck. It made it tough for decks to push through because cards like Heavy Storm were banned. When the dust settled in PA, it marked the end of the 5D's competitive scene. TG Stun took top spot, and even still, Synchro strategies were ultimately the popular pick when looking at all the Synchro decks, not just from this format, but the previous few. From Quick Draw Plant to Synchro Plant to Tengu Synchro and Zombie Synchro. It was evident that the summoning mechanic introduced in 2008 was fully realized by the end. All events consider the top decks to be X-Saber, Plant Variants, Six Samurai, Infernity, Gravekeeper, TG Stun, Worm, Agent, Fish OTK, Dragoonity, Empty Jar, and Hero Beat. Summer 2011 was another good time for the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, I can't believe we're already done the 5D's era, produced in just about a year even. Quite honestly, it was a great time for the game. The formats were rather split between balanced and completely absurd periods. For every Edison, there was a Teledad. For every Star Strike, there was Dark Strike. But all things considered, 5Ds introduced a whole new way to play the game in the extra deck plus synchro monsters and eased into them quite nicely. From a solid freshman lineup to a more powerful tech as the years went on, the game did an excellent job in expanding the potential for card design, combo potential, and game theory. From 2008 to 2011, Yu-Gi-Oh! Never got stale as the meta was ever evolving and avoided cementing toxic environments. There's a good reason why people look back on the 5D's era fondly, and after covering it in exhaustive detail, I can attest to that mindset. But all good things must come to an end, and progressing down the Starlight Road, we're about to enter the Overlay Network.